A crew of 8 astronauts embarks on a 6-month sample collection mission, and today is their last day. In 19 hours, the Aurora spacecraft will arrive from Earth to pick them up. In the Martian desert, Vincent and Rebecca drive a rover to an excavation site and notice a sandstorm brewing. Once they get there, Vincent radios Kim to tell her it's time to return to the base, reminding her that they should prepare for departure. However, Kim ignores him and keeps digging, desperate to find good samples. As they wait, Vincent tells Rebecca that he is tired of Kim's attitude and is not looking forward to the 6-month trip back to Earth, even if he is anxious to be home. When Kim finally boards the rover, he complains about the fact that they will return with nothing to show for it because 6 months was not enough time to accomplish anything. As they return, they receive a call from Captain Charles, who urges them to hurry because they need help fixing their communications link with the Aurora. At the base, Richard manages to restore the signal, but also has to fix the power supply, which has had problems due to the storm. Meanwhile, Marco asks Charles for one last trip to the dig site because he needs to repair a broken gamma sensor. Charles hesitates, but finally agrees and tells him to take Richard too and be back before dark. When the trio arrives and sees Marco and Richard leave, Kim complains because it's not fair that she was forced to go back while the guys can leave again. On the way to the site, Richard is surprised to learn that Marco lied. They're not going to fix anything. They're going to collect a sample of something called a microscopic anomaly. Back at the base, Vincent repairs the cooling system while chatting with psychologist Robert. He has noticed the Aurora's approach trajectory and believes it appears to be driving drunk. Meanwhile, Kim checks Marco's workstation to discover his true intentions behind the trip and discovers an image of cavities in a rock. Rebecca points out that the cavities appear to be microbial boreholes, and when they look at the microbial and sample under a microscope, they find signs of bacterial cell division. This means that Marco lied because he refuses to share credit. Angry, Charles calls Richard and Marco to announce that the dig site is now off limits. However, Marco tells Richard to pretend he didn't hear Charles because of the bad signal. Marco then takes a soil sample from the dig site, and as he takes a closer look, the ground beneath him begins to shake and suddenly collapses, causing Marco to be trapped underground. Richard rushes out of the vehicle to help, but cannot see well due to the steam. Moments after Richard calls for backup, Charles and Lauren arrive to rescue Marco. Richard believes Marco is already dead, but Lauren disagrees and tries to climb down into the shaft. Charles immediately stops her, saying that the well is too dangerous in its current state. They decide that Lauren will stay behind to keep watch while Charles and Richard return to the base to pick up the proper rescue equipment. At the base, Kim tells Charles that she wants to announce her discovery. Richard points out that Marco died, but Kim thinks it's Marco's fault for not respecting protocol and angers Richard. The group contacts Mission Control, who saw the report and gives them permission to retrieve Marco no matter the risk. Before leaving, Robert wants Charles to scold Kim for her behavior because Marco's death is not her fault, but Charles says that every mistake the crew makes is their responsibility. As Charles drives Rebecca, Robert, and Vincent back to the site, Lauren waits in the vehicle. Suddenly, she hears someone trying to get into the vehicle and tries to inform Charles over the radio, but he can't hear her due to interference from the storm. When the team finally arrives at the dig site, Lauren is missing. They assume she fell down the shaft, so Vincent ties his suit to a rope and climbs down. As he is about to reach the bottom, he notices a microbial organism growing in the rock formation. The further down he goes, the worse Vincent feels, and he begins to hyperventilate as he has flashbacks to the time he was accidentally trapped in the Aurora. Realizing this, the others immediately pull on the rope to bring him back up. Vincent takes a moment to calm down and tells them that he didn't see anyone down there. Robert then looks around the area and is surprised to find 2 pairs of footprints in the direction of the base. This doesn't make sense because they could have simply taken the rover with them. The team calls Kim to tell him to be prepared for possible casualties, and in return, Kim points out that if Marco's suit is damaged, he could be suffering brain damage due to lack of oxygen. At that moment, Richard checks the tracking system and sees 2 figures 50 meters from the base. While Kim tries to establish radio contact with them, Richard goes to the airlock to let them in. At the same time, Kim sees a strange figure slowly heading towards the base. Richard opens the airlock and Marco falls to the ground, revealing a hole in his helmet. Richard helps him remove it, but recoils in shock when he sees that Marco now looks like a zombie. Suddenly, Marco stands up and grabs a power drill to attack Richard, and stab him in the stomach. Richard falls, but manages to move enough to set off the alarm. Kim runs to the airlock, but as soon as she sees Marco, she runs away and hides in another room. Soon Lauren also reaches the airlock, revealing that she too is infected. Richard struggles with his pain and manages to run into another room, closing the door behind him. Lauren instead chases after Kim, who begins to fight the creature as best she can, considering she is not a soldier. Soon Marco joins her, and Kim uses every object in the room to defend herself. One of the creatures gets distracted by drinking some liquid on the floor, so Kim knocks the other one down and runs, closing this door as well. Before passing out, Richard manages to say Mayday into the radio. When the others return, Charles tells them to wait outside while he investigates and finds a complete mess inside. He finds Kim when Marco starts breaking down the glass door, so Charles orders him to suit up while he tries to keep the creatures away. Soon Marco comes out and Charles tries to reason with him, but the infected brain doesn't seem to understand the words. Once dressed, Kim leaves the base and Charles runs to the airlock. On his way out, the infected astronauts catch up to him and stab him in the shoulder. After a bit of a struggle, Charles gets out and rejoins the others. They disable the door to trap their sick friends and Vincent complains, but Kim shows him the faces of the creatures while pointing out that they are no longer human. The group runs to hide in the dome of the greenhouse, and Rebecca does her best to treat Charles's wound even though she is not a doctor. Charles realizes that he is dying and becomes sad because he can't remember what his family looks like, so he asks the team to tell his family that they were in his thoughts. Suddenly, Charles grabs Robert by the neck, so the others have to pull him back and try to calm him down. A desperate Vincent holds him down until Charles has trouble breathing. Charles then tells the team that they are never going home and passes out. Vincent thinks he's dead, but Kim immediately straps Charles to the table in case his body revives like Marco and Lauren. Upset by the sight, Vincent covers the body with a blanket. As they discuss what to do, Vincent looks under the blanket and sees the infection spreading. Moments later, they hear an explosion outside, so they look at the monitor and discover that the infected astronauts escaped using an explosive in the airlock. They soon reach the dome and start banging on the door. The crew wants to communicate with the space station, but communications are down, so Vincent volunteers to go through the oxygen pipe to return to the base and fix the system. After Vincent leaves, Rebecca takes a blood sample from Charles and realizes that he too is infected. Minutes later, Vincent stops crawling because he is having a panic attack as he is haunted by memories of his accident on the space station. On the radio, Rebecca helps him calm down by telling him that everyone on the team is as scared as he is. When he finally arrives at the base, he finds blood everywhere but still gets to work. Returning to Rebecca, she wonders if antibiotics could neutralize the bacteria and injects Charles with a solution. Charles's body immediately begins to shake and contort, so Rebecca thinks he may be fighting the infection. However, Kim points out that the movement is just the body's reflexes that have a natural reaction. Once the body stops moving, Rebecca takes another blood sample and discovers that the bacteria are no longer multiplying, meaning that the solution does not cure them, but it does slow them down. Kim pours the solution into a decontamination spray so they can vaporize it and use it against the creatures. Meanwhile, Vincent manages to contact Aurora, but before he can tell them about the situation, the power goes out. Robert checks the monitor and notices that his sick friends are returning to the base because they can't break the dome doors. The team agrees to open the door to lure the creatures into the airlock and spray them with antibiotics. As soon as one of the infected astronauts enters, the decontaminant spray activates and the creature falls to the ground writhing. Unfortunately, Rebecca discovers that the effect is only temporary because the bacteria are starting to developing resistance to the drug. Vincent is trying to fix the power only to find an infected Richard, but he doesn't hesitate to repeatedly hit Richard's head with his flashlight. No matter how hard he hits, the creature won't fall, so Vincent runs to the oxygen pipe and crawls back. He asks Rebecca to open the panel while warning her that he didn't seal the other end of the pipe. The others put on helmets before pulling Vincent out. Kim then grabs 2 bottles of antibiotics and throws them at Richard, who doesn't stop. Vincent and Rebecca race to open the airlock in hopes of escaping. At that moment, Robert realizes that Charles's body is beginning to reanimate, so he runs to and closes the door behind him, leaving Kim to die under the creature's attack. When he joins Vincent and Rebecca, he simply tells them that Kim did not survive. In the airlock, the creature they sprayed earlier is starting to wake up, so Robert kicks it a couple of times in anger. Then, the trio finally open the airlock and flee, but on their way out, their infected friend stabs Rebecca in the leg with a pair of scissors. Fortunately, the crew is quick enough to get to the rover and Vincent injects Rebecca with an antibiotic, hoping it will help her body fight off the bacteria. The group departs on the rover, but after a few moments they realize they don't have enough power to make it to the landing site. They will have to walk there, which Rebecca can't do because of her injury. Vincent thinks they should take Rebecca to the base to treat her injury, but Robert thinks they should leave her behind because she is infected. Rebecca points out that Robert may also be infected because Charles grabbed him by the neck, but Robert changes the subject. He remembers that there is another rover at the dig site, so they head there. Once they get to the right place, Robert heads on foot to the other rover and then contacts Vincent on the radio and tells him to leave Rebecca. Vincent refuses, so Robert escapes on his own. Vincent goes out to stop him, but it's too late. To make matters worse, he sees that the infected have been following them and are getting closer, so Vincent and Rebecca drive the vehicle through the sandstorm hoping to lose them. Vincent believes they will have enough power to make it to the landing site in the morning, once the sun charges the rover's batteries. Meanwhile, the Aurora leaves the space station and heads for Mars. In the morning, Vincent wakes up to find a message from the space station, informing them that a rescue team is on its way. Vincent tries to respond to the message, but the space station cannot hear him. He then realizes that Rebecca left the vehicle, so he begins to follow in her footsteps. He finally finds her, but Rebecca tells him to stay back because she feels the infection is already taking effect. Desperate to save her, Vincent runs to her anyway, so Rebecca removes her helmet and suffocates to death. In just a few minutes, her body revives and she attacks Vincent, who struggles to restrain her. Rebecca begs him to end things for her, so Vincent chooses mercy and hits her head with a rock. Moments later, Vincent sees the Aurora approaching, so he runs towards the landing site. Unfortunately, there are also 3 creatures heading that way, so Vincent tries to warn the Aurora not to open the hatch, but they can't hear him due to interference from the storm. As soon as the rescue team leaves, the creatures attack and kill them, and Vincent can hear their screams of terror on the radio. He still continues on and finds the creatures feeding on the rescue team, but at least they don't notice him. There is also a body rotting in the most terrible of states. Vincent then enters the ship and after closing the door, finds Robert in the cockpit. He is still conscious of himself, but Vincent can already see signs of infection and says they can't risk bringing the bacteria back to Earth. Robert quickly attacks him and a fight ensues, during which Robert stabs Vincent's helmet. Robert then tries to blow up the ship, but Vincent grabs the knife and stabs him. As the ship begins to fly on its own and shakes terribly, the men continue to fight and Vincent repeatedly hits Robert with his head until he stops moving. He then removes his helmet stained with Robert's blood and opens the hatch, sending Robert's body into space. During the few seconds in which he struggles to breathe, Vincent imagines Rebecca comforting him. Later, Vincent sends a message to the station to tell them everything that has happened. He knows there is a possibility that he is infected, so he explains his plan to crash the ship on Mars as soon as he notices any symptoms. The Aurora keeps flying while he waits for an answer.